Hey friend, you're about to watch a 60-minute live stream that I did with Sera Tajima a few months back. In this live stream, we talk all about working abroad as a designer. I've worked in Amsterdam, I've worked in Toronto, I've worked in New Zealand, and Sera has also worked in several places around the world. We touch on topics like how to decide whether moving abroad is right for you in the first place, the process of moving abroad and some tips and tricks and things to think about, and then also some reflections from our time living and working in other countries. This live stream was done on Superpair, and if you're interested in being informed of more live streams that I do like this in the future, head on below to the link in Superpair and you can subscribe over there and you'll be notified about when I next go live. Enjoy the stream. All right, I think we're live. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining on a Friday. Let us know in the chat that you can see us, you can hear us, that this live stream is working well and as expected. It's cool to see where you're all coming in from. Hi from Barcelona, Toronto, Mexico, Nigeria, Stockholm, Houston. So cool to see where everyone is chiming in from. Yeah, especially relevant to today's topic, which is about working abroad as a designer. So it's really cool to see where you are all based at the moment. Maybe let us know in the chat where you want to move to. Super curious, those of you joining the call that might be interested in moving abroad and considering applying for jobs overseas, let us know in the chat where you're thinking about moving to. It's always really interesting to see what folks are interested in. But this is going to be about a 60-minute live stream with myself and Sera. I'm going to give her the mic in just a minute to introduce herself. If you have questions throughout the stream, feel free to pop them in the chat. We're going to collect them and then we'll save about 10 to 15 minutes at the end to go through some of the questions. So feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll be saving them throughout the stream. As always, we love it if you share this on Twitter and Instagram as you're watching. You can tag both of us there. It's always nice to, after the live stream, see all the things that you're sharing and been really excited about on the stream. So feel free to share that over there. And then let's get into some introductions. Sera, welcome to the stream. I'm really excited to have you here and talk about working abroad. Please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And I'm really excited to be here and to see where everyone is coming from. Really diverse group. So I'm Sera. I'm a product designer. I'm originally from Maui, Hawaii, but I'm currently living in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I've lived abroad in quite a few places now. So I've lived in France, in Sweden, now in Amsterdam, and in Japan as well. So a little bit all over the place. I've worked as a product designer for a little over 2 years now. And yeah, I also recently started a YouTube channel, so you can feel free to check that out. I think Femke will share the link. Yeah, yes. Thank you. So yeah, and then I'm also really active on Instagram and Twitter. So if you have any questions for me following this live stream, you can feel free to reach out to me there, and I will be super happy to chat with you about moving abroad.
Yeah, so cool. And so funny, we both lived in Amsterdam, which was not intentionally planned to have a stream with both of us having lived in the same place. But yeah, for context, for those of you who maybe don't know my moving background, so I am originally from New Zealand and I moved to Amsterdam, the Netherlands in 2015. And I lived there for about 4 to 5 years before moving to Toronto, Canada, which is where I'm at now. And I moved here in end of 2019. So it's been a little over a year and a half. So yeah, I think we've both lived in different places, had very different experiences. So I'm really excited to get into it. And I think you originally reached out to me about, doing some sort of collaboration and talking about this topic. I'm curious, why is this an important topic for you, or why do you think people are interested in this topic at the moment?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for me personally, clearly, I just really enjoy living abroad. I've lived in quite a few countries now. So it's always been of interest to me, but as well, once I started actually doing the YouTube and Instagram and sharing my experience being a product designer and where I've lived, I started to get a lot of questions from people just about how I did that, the visa process and what it's like living abroad, if there's cultural differences. So I thought it would actually be really good to talk with someone else who's also lived
Mm-hmm.
abroad and have a discussion about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I've noticed that too. I wonder how much of like the pandemic and now like remote work is becoming more normalized and people are able to have a bit more flexible working situations and environments, how much
Right.
that's influencing people's desire to move abroad. I've definitely had
Yeah.
more people reaching out to me in the last 6 to 12 months, like asking, how do I do this? Like, I really want to live in X country. Like, how can I make that happen? So I think
Yeah.
that's exciting. It's cool that people are interested in, trying a new opportunity and having a completely different adventure.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's sort of the direction that we're headed in now, as you mentioned, with remote work really opening up to everyone. And
Yeah,
I think we're in such a great industry for that flexibility.
true. That is very
Yeah.
true. So let's start with the decision to move abroad. Can you share a
Yeah.
little bit about what made you decide to leave Hawaii, go and experience a different country somewhere else? What were some of the motivations behind that?
Yeah, so I actually left Hawaii when I was 17 for college. So I hadn't been home for quite a long time. So I went to UC Berkeley. And then when I actually got into design, I was living most recently in San Francisco for 2 years. So this was in 2020 when I started applying to jobs in Europe. And I had, at that point, already lived in Paris and also in Sweden. But these were not like job sponsored moves that I made. It was more like a
Right.
study abroad or an internship. So I did really enjoy my time living there. And I also living in San Francisco and having been in the Bay quite a bit was looking for something different. I also felt that in San Francisco, it was not a place that I could see myself settling down. There's so many great things about San Francisco that I really love. Like the food is amazing and you have so many
Yes.
options for things. Yeah, such good food. But at the same time, there are like serious problems, I think, with the city, like a big drug problem and
Hmm.
just a lot of like you really like visually see the wealth gap. And that
Right.
was something that I found a little bit depressing. So yeah, I was sort of looking for a place where I could really feel like, okay, I could live here for a while and I could settle down here and I could feel safe. So that was a big thing. Like now when I'm home, I'll just automatically, like I have reflexes like emptying out my car when I
Oh,
lock it and like
interesting.
locking it. And because the thing is, like in San Francisco, so many people get their car broken into.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so you just know, like, okay, you can't leave anything in your car. And I have these like habits that I've picked up for safety. So I think I just was looking for a place that, really felt a lot more, yeah, like a place that I could settle down in and live for a while.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
was the job and career opportunities a factor at all in any of that decision making, or was it more about like the lifestyle you wanted and your own sort of well-being?
Yeah, it was definitely more focused about on lifestyle and well-being.
Yeah.
And I have found that that is true after the move, that I do feel really, yeah, just
That's
that I
good.
maybe feel less, yeah, I feel like less anxious, I guess is a good way to put
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And I just really like the commuting, it's easy and all of that. But I did have this conversation actually with my mentor, who's the director of design at Zendesk, and he kind of pointed out to me, well, you're leaving a really great community of tech, and
Mm.
in San Francisco, like there's just so much opportunity for product design and just tech in general. So that was something that I did weigh. And in the end, I did decide that it was worth it though. And I can
Yeah.
always go back if I want to.
Yeah, totally. That
Yeah,
option is always there.
right.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because you were living in a place where there was like an abundance of tech and career job opportunities, which is
Yeah,
so in contrast to where I was living in Wellington, New Zealand,
right.
which, it's a small country, an island off the coast of the Pacific, I guess similar to Hawaii, right?
Yes.
And there's not much tech going on down there. There's not that many job opportunities. And that was really one of the motivating factors for me to leave in 2015. I had
Yeah,
just graduated and I was like, okay, well, I'm graduating, so I'm going to have to start looking for a full-time job and, starting my career. And I was like, now feels like a pivotal moment where I could either stay and try and do that here or move abroad. Like, I've got nothing to lose. I didn't own a house. I, didn't and still don't have kids. Like, it just felt really like a time when it was like, now feels like the easiest time if I want to make such a move. So that's ultimately what I decided to do. And
how did you think about what your options were and where you wanted to move?
Yeah, so at the time, I moved with my partner who's also from New Zealand. So we moved together, and we were actually tossing up between Vancouver, Canada, and Amsterdam, the Netherlands, which are two very different places, I know. And ultimately we chose Amsterdam because I have Dutch parents. So I actually have a Dutch passport, and my partner had a British passport. So for us, it was
nice.
It was relatively easy to make that move because we didn't have to worry about visas or anything. Whereas if we wanted to go to Canada at that time, we would have to apply and all of that kind of stuff. So we were like, well, we were able to live in Europe. Like, why don't we just make the most of that? Go and like settle down in Amsterdam, travel also at the same time. We were in our early 20s, and the idea of like going to Paris for a weekend sounded amazing. And so that's ultimately what we ended up doing. So it was a combination of both, like, let's go and like travel, explore, see the world, and also have some more opportunities within our careers.
That's also what I thought about moving to Europe. And then COVID happened.
So I know.
I think I literally just went to Portugal. And then after that, it was total lockdown.
Oh my gosh.
I am really looking forward to traveling.
Yeah, you squeezed in one little trip.
Just one. Yeah. But it was really nice. I loved it. Portugal's beautiful.
Yeah, yes, it is lovely. So what was the process like for you then moving to Amsterdam? I get a lot of questions about visas and things like that. Given I just mentioned I had a Dutch passport, I didn't go through any sort of visa application to move there. What's your experience been?
Yeah, that is a huge benefit. For me, I don't have a European passport. It's on my to-do list.
Nice.
It would be amazing to have, a passport, but I didn't. So basically, I was looking at countries that I'd already lived in as an option for places to apply and to live. So this was really Sweden and France. And I was also looking at the Netherlands because one of my best friends from UC Berkeley moved there immediately after college.
Oh, nice.
And she's a tech recruiter. So she has a lot of insight into the process for the Netherlands and what it takes.
Yep.
Yeah. And so she told me that actually when you move to the Netherlands from other countries for tech specifically, that visa process is really easy because they want highly skilled migrants. And that is really the visa that you get, highly skilled migrant visa.
Yeah.
So I knew that I would need the company to sponsor me for the visa for any country that I went to. And I thought, if I had lived there already, it would be easier, especially, for example, in Sweden, I already had like an identity number there and was registered. And so that's sort of what I was thinking. Like, I knew I liked these places and could live there. With the Netherlands, of course, I hadn't lived there before, but I decided to apply because each time I visited, I really enjoyed my stay. And I think it's just a really beautiful place. And then, of course, knowing that the visa process was easy for tech workers was like a huge bonus. So I went about applying there. So each company was pretty clear with me about like what the process would be and the visa. And if there was a company, for example, that was maybe small and they were like, oh, we can't sponsor you, then that conversation would essentially end there. Yeah. But for every company in the Netherlands, I guess because the government does really support it, it was very clear that they would be able to sponsor me from the beginning.
That's great.
Yes, that process is insanely quick. So for Americans, from the time they apply to the visa and when you get it, it's 2 weeks.
Wow, and 2 weeks to apply and get the visa.
It blows my mind because I don't know if you're familiar with like the US process for getting a visa or most other countries, it takes like a good year or two. And so, that just was really incredible. If you're not American for the Netherlands, they say it takes 1 month, which is like not that big of a difference. Yeah,
Wow.
it's crazy. So they haven't like so efficient and smooth. I also for France, I think if I remember correctly was 4 to 6 months.
Okay.
And with Sweden, I actually found that a lot of the companies couldn't even sponsor that I spoke to. I
Oh,
also had a
interesting.
few, yeah, and I also had a few companies reaching out from London that I did sort of interview with in the beginning. And I think the appeal there was really that in London you get like an insanely high salary compared to the other countries. But then when you take into account the cost of living, it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean that much.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did speak with a few companies there, and that visa process was also 4 to 6 months. But the recruiter did let me know that even if they apply, there's no guarantee that you'll get it. So you
Oh.
could be just waiting around for 4 to 6 months and then get rejected.
Oh.
So yeah, that would not be great.
No. And while
Yeah,
you wait for that, would you have like could you be in the country at the time while it was processing, or would you have had to be out of the country?
no.
Okay.
No, you would have to be out of the country. Yeah. So
Yeah.
what's really interesting is that she told me too that she doesn't advise that you quit your job even because there's a chance
Right.
that you could get rejected.
Right.
Um, so that was interesting to hear about and to sort of entertain. But in the end, with London specifically, I felt like, okay, I'm trying to leave a major city.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really want to go then to another major city.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Have a
so
different experience. That's part of the point, right?
right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I moved to Canada, that's when I did have to go through a visa application process.
Mhm.
So my move to Canada was internal. So I was working
Yes, that's
at
great.
I was working at Uber in Amsterdam, and then I applied internally to transfer to a team in Canada. And that made moving a lot less stressful, I think, than if I had had to do
For
it on
sure.
my own. I had like an immigration lawyer who helped me like totally apply and set up and get the visa, and like Uber was going to sponsor my Canadian visa, and they provided, I don't know if the Amsterdam company you joined helped give you like
Mhm.
relocation assistance, but they helped me with like moving my belongings and things like that, which was
Oh,
really,
that's
really
great.
nice.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I was able to immigrate to Canada, is through basically like a Uber sponsored work permit
Mhm.
for the province of Ontario. So it's not all of Canada, it's just this province.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember, I feel like we applied for it in like May and moved in August. So that means it took like 3-4 months, which
That's pretty
is
quick.
not too bad. It's
Yeah.
pretty good. So yeah, that's ultimately how I got to move to Canada. And I think another thing I want to mention is if you're considering moving abroad, depending on the country you want to move to, you might have certain like agreements with your country or access to special kinds of visas. So for
Mhm.
example, given I'm from New Zealand, which is part of the Commonwealth, as is Canada, there was actually multiple different visa options available for me. There's also like an under 30, like if you're under 30 years old, you can get like a 2-year working visa in Canada if you're part of the Commonwealth. So yeah, there are certain criteria depending on like your citizenship and the country you're moving to. It's just worth doing a little bit
Yes.
of research into what those extra options might be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think research is key. I know it differs so much depending on what your citizenship is and where
Yeah.
you're moving to.
Yeah.
Because, for example, with the US, which is like notoriously bad for getting a green card and,
I've
it's
heard.
just the H-1B and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so much work. And it helps to, I guess, like have a big company sponsoring you because the
Mm-hmm.
legal costs, from
Mm-hmm.
what I know, I think it's 8,000 to apply for an H-1B visa for
Wow.
that
Yeah, it's a lot.
company. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so typically they sort of need like an in-house legal team, or they need to, hire an external legal team to handle all of that process. So yeah, it's quite challenging. But I know, for example, with the US, I believe there's another visa like E6 or something, where if you're from France, for example, and you find a founder from France in the US, you get that visa instead. And
Oh,
that's a little bit
interesting.
easier to get. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's different things. Also, if you're a student, you can get, I think you have like 1 year after, and then you can get a different visa. So
Yep, that makes sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
different routes.
Yes, a lot of different routes, which is always why I find it really difficult to answer when people reach out and ask me like, how do I move to this country? I'm like, I don't know. It can like really depend
like,
on
where
like,
are you from?
yeah, where are you from? Like,
Yeah.
what experience do you have? Like, do you have like tertiary education? Like that gets you extra bonus points when you're applying overseas. You know, if you have a degree, a lot of it is like very points based and like what you're bringing to the country, you know, they're really going to assess that. So it's always very difficult to, answer that. What are some of the things that you had to consider when moving abroad?
Yeah, so I think I was pretty flexible as well. Like I don't have kids, I'm not tied down to a mortgage or something.
Yep.
So for me, it was really like, okay, where would I want to live? And then also I have a dog, so I needed to figure out how to bring my dog with me. Yeah, and that was like, normally it wouldn't be that bad, right? But everything that was stressful was sort of magnified because of COVID. And because as I was going through applying, companies were freezing positions. And as I was going through, there was like an EU travel ban that started, and then the US banned Europeans, and I was just like, oh my God,
that sounds
like,
very
why
stressful.
is all of this happening? Yeah, so I was really on top of it with like getting paperwork in line, which is what I had to do for my dog. For example, I needed like a health certificate from the vet, and then I had to send it to like the US Department of Agriculture, something random, where I was like, really, those are the people that handle this. So, and then like they had to send it back within 2 days of me leaving, and there was just like a lot of timeline to work with.
Yeah.
Everything happened relatively quickly though. Like I went and looked at my calendar last night, and I started applying in February of 2020. And I think, so let me see, I actually started moving out and shipping everything around end of April.
Oh,
so from mid-April to
pretty
end of
quick.
April. Yeah, and the thing is, during COVID, I also was trying to sell my car, but we went into lockdown. So I ended up having to ship my car back to Hawaii.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and so it was really crazy.
Yeah. Sorry, my dog's making an appearance. Yeah, that sounds like a lot to try and go through moving like in a pandemic. I can't even imagine the extra stress and like burden that must have put on you to try and figure all of that out with like various lockdowns, and you know, suddenly you don't have access to all the normal things anymore. So that's definitely challenging.
Yeah, I think like for San Francisco specifically, normally you could actually go into the office to get paperwork done, but they were shut, so you had to mail it. And then that was like the stress of, will I get it back on time?
Yeah.
But you asked about relocation fees.
Yeah.
And MessageBird is my current company. They did give me like a small, I guess, relocation bonus.
Yeah.
But because I had to ship my car back to Hawaii, all of the money went towards shipping the car.
Oh no.
Yeah. And so I essentially just like moved with like 2 suitcases to Amsterdam. And it's honestly like, it sounds stressful. It was not that bad. Like I somewhat enjoyed it.
The process.
Like it was interesting to learn about, you know, and I was a little stressed at various points, but it wasn't that bad.
Yeah. When I moved to Amsterdam, I just went with like 2 suitcases because I was living at my parents' house still at that stage. You know, I like didn't really have any belongings or anything. The move from Amsterdam to Canada was definitely a lot more like we shipped furniture. We had a cat, so we had to bring the cat.
Oh my gosh.
There was a lot that we decided to bring over. So we used like a moving company, and you know, our stuff went on a boat, and we didn't see it for like 4 months. It's really weird.
Oh, wow.
We came to Toronto and like lived out of our suitcase for like 4 months because there was no point buying furniture because our furniture was coming on a boat. So it's like this really weird in between where we were just living in an empty house waiting for our furniture to arrive.
Funny that it also took like that period of time to arrive.
Yeah, I guess boats are very slow, unfortunately.
They couldn't like ship it with a drone.
No, sadly not. But yeah,
Yeah.
I remember we actually got really lucky in that we, through a friend of a friend, managed to find a apartment before coming here. So like
Okay.
we had a friend on the ground in Toronto and they came to the apartment viewing and were on video with us still in
Hmm.
Amsterdam, like showing us around
Oh
the
my gosh.
apartment. We're like, yeah, we'll
Yeah.
take it, we'll take it. And so, yeah, we got to arrive on the day. We landed on the ground, came straight to our new apartment.
Wow.
And
Nice.
that was pretty nice at that stage to like have that to come and arrive to. And I think we arrived here like 2 weeks before we had to start work. So we
Hmm.
kind of like took
Okay.
2 weeks
Well,
off
that's pretty
between.
quickly.
Yeah, like it gave us enough time to kind of like settle in, like explore the neighborhood a little bit, get our bearings, like
Yeah.
figure out how stuff works. Also, there's a lot of like governmental things you need to do when you arrive in a country, right?
Yeah.
Like
How
go and
did
get,
that go for you?
yeah, I mean, better than when I was in Amsterdam. I think the language barrier in the Netherlands also adds a whole nother like dimension to that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. Here it was a little bit easier, and I think also being from a Commonwealth country, like I could just update my driver's license. I didn't have to sit a new test or anything.
Oh,
Um,
that's nice.
yeah, so I think it went smoother here, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of like getting your healthcare sorted and like your insurance and all of those like admin things took like it's more work than expected when you arrive in a country. Like that took like 2 weeks to
Yeah.
figure all of that out.
Yeah. 2 weeks still is relatively quick, I think,
Yeah, I
to get all of
guess.
that done.
Although it's like 2 weeks like not working, like full time, you're like going to
Yeah,
the
true.
insurance place
Running
and
around.
standing in line and then going to the other place. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, right. Interesting. So for me, when I arrived, I think it also took 2 weeks to a month to get
Yeah.
all of that government stuff settled. And the thing is, like, I didn't speak Dutch, of course, when I
Mm-hmm.
arrived, but I did find that everyone pretty much spoke English.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what I did find later is that I think if you need support for something and you call, those people tend not to speak English as well because I think maybe they're like in
Oh,
a more remote area, like they're not in Amsterdam. So I
okay,
think
yeah.
when you're actually in the city, like people are pretty good about speaking English with you and you can get things across. I was
Yeah.
also really surprised moving to Amsterdam how, like, I guess friendly people were.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really expect that. When I like, so I lived in France and Sweden, and I think like, they all the countries differ culturally, right? Like, um, in Sweden, I don't think you're like so open and friendly towards other people. Maybe it's like a little bit similar with France. In the US, even if you don't know someone, people are like super open and friendly with
Right.
you. And so, yeah, I think there's just like these little differences.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I guess having known that, I didn't expect going to the Netherlands that people like total strangers would then also be really friendly with you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're kind of
How's your,
like, yeah, I mean, my experience in Canada has been,
yeah,
um, I feel like the Canadian culture is more similar to the New Zealand culture than the Dutch culture
yeah,
was to the New Zealand culture. Like the
okay.
Dutch culture was a bit more of a stark contrast with what I'm
Hmm.
used to in New Zealand, and moving to Canada was kind of like, I don't know, it wasn't like coming home, but like the culture was like more familiar, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
that makes sense.
yeah, so I don't know,
Yeah,
it's so different how like big, well, interesting how big of a difference like culture can make, I think, on your experience in
totally.
a place, which
Yeah,
kind of like comes into our like next topic we had around like working in
yeah,
these different cultural environments. Um,
right.
I know that like Amsterdam and the Netherlands is very good at speaking English, and like I found that too during my time there. Like, you know,
Hmm.
all of the work is done in English during the day. You don't have to speak Dutch. But even with that said, like, are there any other cultural differences that you've experienced, maybe particularly in the workplace, and like how do you kind
Yeah.
of juggle that?
So I think one of the biggest things that surprised me about the Netherlands and working in tech there is that it's so diverse. I don't know how
Mm-hmm.
it was at Uber, but I was actually really surprised to move there and find that all my coworkers were from totally different countries. So like people from Brazil, people from Finland, Spain, France,
Right.
Germany. Yeah, just, and like people from South America, like it was Canada, all over the place, really.
Yeah.
And so I think in that sense, I really like it. I think it's super cool to work with people from all over the place, but you're also not really navigating like a Dutch culture, you're navigating everyone's culture.
A multicultural.
And so, yeah. And so different people communicate differently, right? And you have to sort of like, I think a huge part of it is just building relationships with the people you work regularly with, because
Right.
then you can kind of gauge where they're coming from. It's also, I think, helpful when people are like, hey, I'm super direct, like don't take it personally, or hey, I might need a little bit more time, or you know, can we chat about this? So I think it's really just feeling people out and yeah, kind of like taking your time to get like build a real relationship.
Yeah. I've definitely found the same experience, and it was so interesting going from Amsterdam, which, like you say, there's a lot of people there from different countries and different continents, and like it's almost like every interaction you have with someone is like a different cultural experience sometimes, and like adapting to their like cultural ways, which is interesting. Like you learn a lot. I also kind of struggled with it sometimes when, like, I don't know, maybe I'm in a rush, or like I just need to get something done, and then I just want to, you know, like how do I approach that kind of situation? But yeah, you're right. I did find like the Dutch are a little bit more direct than like say North American culture, or like even like New Zealand culture, right? And I think the Dutch know that. I don't think that's a bad thing to say, and if anything, I think they're proud of it. And I struggled with it initially, but then I actually loved it, because it meant that like you could just cut straight to the chase of things, and like things were so much more efficient, and like feelings didn't need to get hurt along the way. And like it was just the sense of like getting things done, and like it's not personal. What's been your experience with that?
So so I think that my communication style is very direct, and so I just sort of fit right in. And I think that in San Francisco, when people worked with me, they knew that I was just really like straight to the point, and you know, it's not meant to be like offensive or anything. Like it's just about the work and about you know, just having like really direct communication and not beating around the bush. But I do totally understand that cultures communicate differently, right? Because I'm also Japanese, and also have a Japanese passport. But in Japanese culture, it's like you would never say something to the person's face that's bad. You know, it's very much like beating around the bush. And so, yeah, I have that understanding. But I do recall there was one specific time where I was talking with my direct manager about something, the head of design. And he was like, look, I know Americans are really direct or something. And I was like, what? Like, I don't know if Americans are direct. I guess I think it depends. Sometimes I feel like Americans can be really like open and friendly, but you don't really know what they're thinking. Right. So I thought that was interesting. But my head of design is from Brazil, and we're in the Netherlands. And so there's just all these like nuances to having a conversation. But yeah, I was a little bit like, but the Dutch are direct. Like, I don't know. So it's interesting for sure. Like, I think it just depends a lot on the person as well.
Yeah, totally. And you get used to it after a while. It's been so different moving to Canada, which I think has obviously that more North American nicety, very friendly, very open, accommodating. So yeah, it's very different, and it was so interesting because I found myself getting frustrated at them being so nice all the time. Like, just tell me directly like what it is, or like give me the feedback. And I think I'd been so conditioned, so used to how it was working in the Netherlands. So that has definitely been very interesting, and I feel like I've like picked up some of the directness from the Netherlands, which like now I feel like living here in Canada, I have to control a little bit, you know? It's caught me off guard a few times too, like, which is just it's really interesting. I feel like I've gone from like the New Zealand culture of like being really open and friendly, kind of like that North American style, to like the super direct, and then now kind of back to it. And like, I have to like process it a little bit. It is like kind of nice in a way that like, I mean, most of my colleagues here are Canadian or North American at least.
Hmm.
And so there is like this communication style that seems like everybody seems to follow, which in some way
Yeah,
makes it easier to work together because everyone has the same expectation on how we communicate. Um,
right.
so yeah, that's sometimes nice to have that and not have to navigate all of those different cultures.
Yeah. So do you find that actually like the Canada workplace is less diverse than coming from the Netherlands?
I mean, that's a really interesting question. I would say yes. I think it's less diverse in that like it's mostly North Americans
Yeah,
in my
okay.
workplace here.
Interesting.
Um, that said, like Toronto as a city is very diverse. I actually
Yeah.
think Toronto is one of the most diverse cities. I think like over 50% of people living here are not from Toronto or not Canadian.
Hmm.
So like when I go outside in my neighborhood, it's extremely diverse. But in the
Yeah.
workplace, I guess I work in tech. Yeah, I do find here it's a lot of North Americans.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that because I feel like Amsterdam is sort of the opposite, where the people that you work with are all from different countries in tech, and that's
Yeah,
super diverse. But
yeah.
then you go in the street and it's like a lot of Dutch people.
Right.
I
I
don't know if
remember
you feel
that
the
too.
same.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
Dutch people around. Yeah, it's so interesting.
Yeah. So what's like one of your favorite things now about living in Canada that you find unique to Canada?
Oh, one of my favorite things. I mean, I really enjoy the nature here.
Hmm.
Coming from New Zealand, which also has very nice nature. That
Yeah.
was one of the things I was missing living in the Netherlands. So
Hmm.
I really enjoy the outdoors here and like having a real summer is really, really nice.
Yeah.
Like the Dutch summer can be so like New Zealand isn't very seasonal. It's like a very consistent climate mostly
Yeah.
throughout the year. So having like a real summer here and being able to like enjoy the seasons, which is so contrasting, that's been
Yeah.
really cool. I think like work wise, there's a lot of interesting tech here. You know, there's like some really interesting Canadian companies and also like North American companies that are starting to like have these satellite offices in Canada. So
Yeah.
that's cool to have that opportunity career wise as well.
Hmm. Yeah, nice. So I've only lived in the Netherlands for about 1 year now. But the summer that I had there, there was actually like a heat wave. And then,
Oh,
yeah, so it was like really hot and no one is prepared for this. No one has AC in their apartment or anything. You're just like working and sweating.
yes, I remember
And
the,
then in the
yeah.
winter, it snowed. So I think you didn't experience snow when you were there, right?
I think it snowed once, but yeah, it's very
Once.
rare.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. But it snowed several times, and it snowed it snowed this month, like a week ago or something. So
Bizarre.
I don't know if it's like global warming or what, but yeah,
Yeah.
really strange.
That's super
Yeah.
strange. Let's touch on cost of living a little bit because I know there's been some questions in the
Yes.
chat about it. Yeah, what's your experience like with that? I know you were talking earlier about like considering jobs in London, but then
Yeah.
the cost of living is really high. I think everyone knows living in San Francisco is very, very high cost of living.
Yes.
So how did that play into deciding where to move abroad and what's kind of your
Yeah.
experience been so far?
Yeah, cost of living is really one of the big factors in why I left the city because I was like, okay, I can never afford a house here because someone will swoop in with cash and pay 1 million and you just yeah, can't compete with
Yeah.
that. So I think like of course you get paid well in San Francisco because the cost of living is so high. But there are other factors. So because I've lived in France and in Sweden, I had an understanding of what a salary might look like there.
Right.
And I was very aware that I would take a hit, like my salary would decline when I moved. And it definitely did. So I make a third now of what I made in San Francisco,
Mm-hmm.
but I still have like a very high quality of life. And so I think instead of like I think sometimes we can get so focused on the numbers for what we'll make, but in reality you should really take into account what the cost of living is in that city. So
Yeah.
like what does rent look like? How much are groceries?
Yeah.
How much are the things that you do for enjoyment? Things like that. And so when I did research, I knew like, okay, Sweden, I would probably make the lowest. But of course, in any case, it's enough to live. And then France and the Netherlands were sort of on par with what they would pay. One thing I did encounter, which I found really interesting with France, is that a lot of times, so for the companies that I spoke to, they would say like, well, if you have this many years of experience, we need to pay you exactly the same as the other people. And like you would sort of get promoted at exactly the same periods. And I really hesitated with that because I sort of came from the San Francisco model where it's like based on your merit that you get paid and that you get promoted and all of that. So that really stood out to me. So yeah, I mean, with London, they, you know, the amount that they had offered was the most, but in terms of living, it's also high. So
yeah.
I think I looked less for sure at like the actual dollar or euro amount or pound that I would make, and more at, okay, how much is rent there and things like that.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah. So when I moved from Amsterdam to Toronto, I also took a pay cut. And I've actually made a video all about my salaries, and it's one of the things that I get like the most comments about in that video is like, wait, but your salary declined. Like, why did your salary decline so much moving from Amsterdam to Toronto? And yeah, the answer is cost of living. Like, you know, I don't get to keep the same salary in different countries and hop around the world. So yeah, it was adjusted for cost of living. And I agree with you. I think we can get really hung up on the like salary number. But what matters more, I think, is like the cost of living and your take home pay. It's funny because like, even though my salary is lower here, at the end of the day, once you think about taxes, my take-home pay is actually very similar to what I was making in Amsterdam. The Netherlands has a much higher tax rate, as I'm sure you've experienced, than the USA and Canada. And so even though my salary here is lower, my take-home pay is actually not that different because I'm paying much less tax here than I was in the Netherlands. So yeah, that's just something to think about as well.
Yeah, that makes me really curious about, because you have a Dutch passport. So does that mean that you didn't get the 30% tax ruling?
That is correct. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to explain the 30% tax ruling to, do you want to explain that tax ruling to the group? Because I'm familiar with it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So if you're a foreigner, you come and apply for your visa for the first time. I believe it's 3 years now. It used to be 5 years, but for 3 years, you get a 30% tax break on your salary. And that actually makes a big difference.
Huge.
And what is really interesting as well is that when I was interviewing with France, they had also created this benefit. And I believe in France, it's up to 7 years.
Wow.
Because they're also trying to get tech talent.
Yeah. So, it's an incentive, right? To get people, like to get foreigners to move there because you get a lower tax break.
Exactly. And it's really contentious. I mean, I haven't spoken with like French people about the tax break, but I've spoken with Dutch people in the Netherlands about it. And it's very contentious because they're like, you're foreign, like you're not even from here. Why are you getting a 30% tax break? And I think there's also a little bit of tension around like actively trying to bring in highly skilled migrants, and then do like the people living there feel like they have equal access to the job, and are they being paid the same as the foreigner that comes in? And you know, like it brings up all these questions.
Totally. No, as a person with a Dutch passport, I'm not eligible for the 30% ruling, but that's okay. I'm happy to pay my taxes where it's due. I think all that to say is like, there's so much more to consider than just the salary, right? Cost of living is very different. Like in Amsterdam, I assume you do the same. Like I cycled everywhere. I didn't own a car. I barely ever paid for public transport. Here in Toronto, like I have a car now that I have to pay for, and like, you know, I can't necessarily just cycle as easily around the city like I could in Amsterdam. It's a much bigger city, so now I have transportation costs I need to think about. So yeah, there's a lot to consider there as well.
Definitely. Yeah, I really love being able to bike around the city.
Yeah.
And before I moved, I was really nervous about winter, especially being like from Hawaii. And It's actually totally fine. I mean, I think the
Yeah.
worst thing really is when it rains and you're like cycling
Yes,
in the
then
rain
you're
and it's
in
just,
wet.
yeah.
It's not great.
So yeah, yeah. But
Um,
it's so convenient to get around.
yeah, definitely. I
Yeah.
miss Amsterdam cycling life. Before we get into Q&A, I want to get into that soon because we do have some questions. So for those
Mhm.
tuning in, if you do have a question, you've been holding off, feel free to pop it in the chat now and we'll get to that in a minute. Maybe some last thoughts on like, what advice would you have for somebody who wants to move abroad?
Yeah. I think it's going to be different for everyone depending on what citizenship they have, or plural, and what country they're trying to move to. And I would say if you're really set on moving abroad, it's probably good to even consider multiple countries. It might make it a
Mm-hmm.
little easier to assess which option is best for you.
Yeah.
So that's really something that I would recommend is like you have to do your due diligence and do research on each country, what sorts of visas they have, how sponsorship works. There's probably a lot of forums that you can go to understand how this has worked for other people in the same situation. I think Reddit is always a great tool for this.
Yes.
Yeah, so yeah, just do a bit of research, and then as well, like as you start interviewing with different companies, of course you can ask them what that process looks like, and that will give you a way better understanding as you're moving forward about what to expect.
Yeah. Plus one, I think the research is vital. It's definitely a requirement. Like, do your research into where you want to move and what your options are. I've seen some questions in the chat, and I've been asked this as well, is like, how many
Mhm.
years of experience do I need to have before I can start moving abroad? Or like,
Yeah,
what if I'm a junior designer, or, things like that.
right.
I think like my advice is like, just apply and see what happens. I don't think there is any hard criteria. At least I haven't experienced that, where it's like,
Yeah,
you must be at least 25 years old or have
yeah,
had 3 years experience. And, I don't think there's like
right.
any of those really particular requirements. At the end of
Yeah,
the day, it's coming down to like the candidates and like what you can bring to the company, right? And whether you're a good candidate for the role. So I would just
yeah,
encourage you to get a
exactly.
portfolio together or whatever it is that you need to apply, and just try and see where that conversation goes.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I moved to the Netherlands, I had 1 year of product design experience. So you never know.
Yeah, I had no
Yeah.
design experience when I moved to the Netherlands, and then I guess like 3 years when I moved to Canada. So
Yeah.
yeah, you definitely don't need
Right.
to be a guru to make this happen.
No. Yeah. I think it's a lot more about your skill set and what you bring to the table, as you said.
For sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's get into some of these questions. So we might not have time to get through all of them, but let's start with this one.
Mhm.
Should you go to the city you want to live in and then try to find the job? So should you move there first and then try to get the job, or try to get the job before moving? What's been your
Yeah,
experience
that's
with
a
this?
good question. For me, I was limited, of course, because of COVID. Like I wouldn't even have been
Mm-hmm.
allowed into the country without the work visa. Um, but I still think like it's probably a good idea to go visit that city at least once before
Yep.
you move your whole life there. So I
Yep.
would say that. But I think, people are also limited depending on what country they're from and where they're going to. Like, for example, US citizens or Europeans can go to each other's country for 3 months max. And
Right.
so I don't think it actually makes any difference to be there, because either way, you're going to have to go through the entire application process online.
Yep.
So you're not going to be able to like walk into an office and be like, here's my resume, I want a job. Like in any case, you'll have to go through this proper process, right, of applying. And
Yep.
yeah, I think it really depends.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it definitely, if you can go and visit before you move somewhere, then do that. I did that with Toronto. We came and visited Toronto, I think a year before we actually moved here, just to check, like, do we like it? Is it a
Yeah.
place we can see ourselves living? I would say there's a difference though between visiting before you move and like moving and then trying to get the job. You
Mhm.
might struggle moving there without the job in terms of what visas might be available to you. So just think about like strategically what the best sequencing of that is. Usually, from what I've heard from other friends, it's like more successful if you can get the job and then they sponsor you to move there. So just think
Yeah.
a little bit about that.
Right. I think a lot of times too, when they sponsor you, you have to be coming into the country with that visa. So
Yes,
that's another
yes,
factor. Yeah.
yes. Totally. Okay, another question is around some differences in recruiting processes between European and American companies.
Hmm.
What's been your experience there,
Yeah.
especially as an American? How was it interviewing at a European company?
Yeah, it differs for sure, I think. So one of the things that I really liked about the Netherlands is that I felt culturally and in terms of processes, it was the most similar to San Francisco. So that felt really sort of natural for me.
Yeah.
I think, depending on the country, sometimes they're a little bit more formal, because it just reflects the cultural differences that they have.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes they want to take longer or they're a little bit more formal with you.
Yeah.
Whereas, yeah, interviewing with Amsterdam, I felt like in terms of process that I went through and the way that they conducted everything, it felt very American. So yeah.
Interesting.
How
Yeah,
was
at
it with
one
Canada?
Yeah, well, I think because even though I work in Canada, I work for an American company, right? Which is
Right.
Uber. I feel like it is a very American work environment. I felt that even when I was in Amsterdam, like the interview
Yeah.
process and like some of the the culture internally is naturally a little bit American because it is an American
Right.
company. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I haven't had that much experience interviewing elsewhere. To be honest, I like when I initially was interviewing for Uber back in Amsterdam, I did interview at a
Yeah.
couple of other Dutch companies, and I did notice a
Hmm.
little bit of a difference in the interview style there between like Uber, which was American, and then like an actual Dutch company, which didn't seem to adopt that American kind of interview process. Um,
Yeah.
but generally, I would say like most most recruiting for like a design role does seem to have a similar structure, in that like
Right.
usually you have a portfolio or some sort of work that you need to show or share. Maybe there's a whiteboarding exercise or a take-home assignment, meeting some of the team. Like I haven't felt that to be wildly different in different places.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I can say the same in my process that it was sort of like someone looks at your portfolio, then you do the recruiter call, and then you do a hiring manager call.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
Yeah.
if that goes well, you get like an assignment or you do your portfolio presentation or both. So
Yeah.
it tends to follow the same path. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I want to answer this question because I feel like it's especially timely with COVID and sort of like
Yeah.
lack of being able to travel right now. How much do you miss your friends and your family? And is it easy to make new friends outside of work when you move to a new country?
Yeah, this is a good question. My mom likes to call me Hikoshi Bimbo in Japanese, which is like a person that's like broke because they're constantly moving around. And
Oh,
so yeah, it's like her way to make fun of me. But I have really, since college, moved like every 6 months to a new place. And I've just been, yeah, really
on the
all
go.
over the place
Yeah.
globally. Yeah, like always having one suitcase. And so I think having had that experience since I was 17, I guess, I've just gotten used to being away from family and friends. And I
Yeah.
think it's also like given me a lot of richness in my life because I now have friends that are just all over the globe. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's really incredible that I can like go to Paris and have a friend there, or I can go to like South Africa, or yeah, just have friends like all over the place. And so at any given point in time, I'm missing some friends and some family in somewhere, on the globe. And
Yeah.
I think you just get used to it. But the great thing about technology now is that, like, I think I talk to my parents so frequently. Like, we're
Yes.
doing FaceTime or WhatsApp. And so it's the same for all my friends, really. Like, I have a lot of I have a close friend, of course, in Amsterdam and in Paris, and then in San Francisco, I have my design friends, and so we just have a lot of group chats going where we're keeping in touch and
Yeah, that's
talking, and
nice.
we'll schedule like a Zoom call. So
Yeah.
yeah, what's your experience with that? Because you're also really
Yeah.
far away from home.
I am very far away from home. Yeah, my family and I like to take turns visiting each other. So
That's
I might
nice.
go there one year, they might come and see me the next year.
Yeah.
So that's nice. Having a family that enjoys to travel and wants to come and visit me is very nice.
Yeah.
Obviously haven't been able to do that lately, but hopefully sometime soon. Um, yeah, I mean, similar. I feel like I do have a lot of richness because I do have these friends and relationships all over the world that I'm really grateful for, and provides me with such different perspectives. And it's really cool to have that in my life. I will say that, like, coming from New Zealand, it's not super common to go overseas from there. So I
Mhm.
do find sometimes, like, my friends back home in New Zealand, I don't stay as in touch with as I would like to. I think they're all like together hanging out, and like I'm that one person overseas that they don't think about very often, if you know what I mean. Um, so yeah, I feel like I'm more in touch with my friends I've met throughout Europe and North America because they are also expats, or like they also travel a lot, or like
Yeah.
they get it, they have these communities in other places around the world, compared to my friends in New Zealand, which, like, everyone's very like home there, and it's not as common to be overseas. So yeah, I think Amsterdam too, being like that multicultural place you were talking about, where there's a lot of people from different countries,
Hmm.
you form a sense of community around that too, right? Like
Yeah.
you're not the one non-Dutch person in the room. There's lots of different people, so that gives you a sense of connection as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and for me, my experience moving to Amsterdam was really easy because I just sort of slipped into my best friend's friend group. So,
Nice.
and yeah, and that's also really diverse too because my best friend is Filipino, and then there's like a German girl, and there's a French girl, and so
Yeah,
yeah, it just ends up being really culturally rich.
yeah, yeah, I love
Yeah,
that. um
yeah.
there was a couple questions, I think, around like speaking the native language.
Hmm.
How important do you think it is to be able to speak that local native language?
Yeah, I really like languages. So I always try to learn wherever I am. And I think that if you don't speak the language, then you'll always have a barrier where this is, yeah, I don't want to sound super intense, but I feel like you'll always be an outsider if you
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
learn the language, you know?
yeah,
And this goes back to a conversation that we were having earlier um, where a lot of people in the Netherlands who are expats say that they only hang out with other expats and they don't hang
right.
out with the local Dutch people. And this has also actually really been my experience in France. And like the reason that I'm able to hang out with like local people is because I had a friend, you know? So like that's sort
You
of
knew
your
someone on the
in.
inside. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's sort of the same with the Netherlands, right? Like my partner is Dutch. So in that sense, like I definitely am trying to learn Dutch. But also that means that I've sort of like been just adopted into his circle as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I do hang out with like a lot of expats and also a lot of Dutch people.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I've definitely had that experience too in the Netherlands, where like you need like that in, like someone who's Dutch to like bring you into the
Yeah.
circle. It's
Right.
very easy otherwise to just have your friends, your friend circle all be expats. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I commend you for learning the language, because a lot of my expat friends who live there, I mean, they do a bit of Duolingo, right? But like
Yeah.
you can
Right.
get away with English really easily there.
Yeah.
Um,
So easy.
Same with like places like Berlin too, and like Stockholm, things like that, where they
Yeah.
speak English very, very well.
Perfectly. Yeah.
So it's not a necessity to speak the local language, but there's definitely a lot of benefits to speaking it.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
yeah,
And I think like going into that negotiation about your like package that you get from whatever company you're moving with, part of that can also be having like a language agreement where, for example, with
mm,
MessageBird, they have courses, but I wanted something more intense. So they actually like paid for my University of Amsterdam like intensive Dutch
nice.
course. Yeah,
Wow.
so I think that's something you can kind of negotiate because it's not just about salary, right? It's like
Yeah,
about getting help with an apartment and being
yeah,
able to learn the language and feel like you're integrating. So,
yeah, totally.
yeah.
Yeah, it's all about feeling, yeah, integrating. That's a really good word, like how to integrate into the culture.
Yeah,
Takes time, takes a lot of time.
definitely.
Well, Thank you for this conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot from talking to you, and hopefully folks who have tuned in have also learned a lot. Just to remind everybody, like, where can they find you if they want to connect more with you or sort of follow you online?
Yeah, so I'm doing videos on YouTube, and I believe the link was shared. I'm probably most active on Instagram in terms of checking that and trying to respond to everyone's message in a timely manner. I'm
Yep.
also on Twitter, but definitely less frequently. So you can reach out to me on whatever channel really that you use frequently, and I will, respond.
Awesome. Well, thank you so
Yeah,
much for joining and coming on with me on this stream and reaching out to me to collaborate in the first place.
yeah, thanks so much for having me. I think this was a really great conversation, and I hope this was helpful for the people that joined. And yeah, feel free to reach out.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks so much for those of you who have tuned in. I know we're just over the hour. We did record this session, so if you came late or you missed something, I will be sharing out the recording in my email newsletter, but you can also go to my Superpeer profile and it will be posted there in a few days or so. But thank you so much for tuning in, watching the stream, and have a wonderful weekend.
Yeah, same to you. Bye.
Bye.